Hi, everyone. Welcome to 12 Step Crashers podcast, second episode. Your host, Eric, and myself, Ev, are really pleased to be starting this journey of a podcast, something we haven't done, unless I'm mistaken. Eric, you haven't ever done a podcast before, right?
Let me think. No.
There's a lot of things we are doing as sober people that are outside of our comfort zone, let's say. And as a reminder, because that was kind of the gist of the first episode that we recorded, but we are in early recovery. I'm a little bit over a year sober. Eric, you're closing soon on 2.
No, not yet. But I'm at 10 months and about a week. About 10 days. 10 months, 10 days. Something like that.
I don't count months personally, even years. I don't really have milestones. So to me, we are kind of at the same place because it's a matter of growth in recovery. And I learn a lot from you. So what does that say? Like, I think you are doing well with your sobriety. If I can.
I feel like this week it's been a very good week. We were just in a group meeting I could have shared because I actually had something pertinent, but I'll keep it for another meeting.
Right. Excellent. But and also like sometimes we have some pretty rough weeks, right? But ultimately, I think we are learning to manage more and more this life that used to be unmanageable in active addiction.
But that's the tools, right? Because I think one thing we both agree on, and I think which is pertinent probably to our podcast, and we will, as we do more podcasts, talk more about the tools and how we apply them, is that we really do apply them and we notice and we're aware of using them.
Yes, exactly. I share that opinion with you. I'm convinced that the tools I've learned in Smart Recovery did change my life more than anything else. As not to say that meetings that we go to almost every day are not helping in my recovery, or just staying abstinent doesn't help me, but being able to manage my emotion and my actual behaviors is the key, I think, to my success. At least that's what makes this enjoyable, that journey of recovery.
Actually, I don't actually always manage them, but I recognize them.
That's right. We are not all of a sudden becoming expert at everything emotion-wise, but
No, but we're supposed to have emotions. That's the thing. We always talk about managing, but you know what? They're going to happen. And sometimes they're going to manifest in ways that we're not proud of 2 minutes later.
100%. And like the difference now, at least for me, is that I don't bottle it up. It comes out sometimes pretty harsh, pretty edgy, or I'm emotionally not necessarily quote unquote on control, but I'm processing that emotion right away, as opposed to something that I never did before. Even before active addiction, I didn't know how to do these things, right? It doesn't make us any better than anybody else. It just help us heal from the disease that we are suffering from.
Well, I think what the better way to approach it, or to say it maybe, is it doesn't make us any better than anybody else except ourselves. We're better selves.
Every day I'm a better person than I used to be the day before, and that's
exactly.
something I can get behind as a journey and as an objective for the rest of my life, let's say. Speaking of tools, speaking of smart recovery, and why we're doing this podcast, it's not only to talk and express ourselves. I think we have.
You mean we don't talk shit all the time?
Yeah, like we did on the last episode. Not that it was not great. It was.
I didn't notice.
Yeah, all that to say that we are going to have some guests on our podcast. We have a fantastic community that is very little known, I believe, and I hope we get more attention to this community in which we are evolving right now, and in many aspects did save my life and yours. So for that reason, we have our very first guest that we both have met in treatment. Actually, she was my intake nurse, and well, that in itself is a story for a podcast. Me getting into rehab, but it's not the point of discussion today. But we actually, she's holding meetings in Montreal. The very first and only meeting that is Smart Recovery in Quebec.
And why is that? We'll have to delve into that one of these times.
Yes. Well, we kind of touched on it, I believe, with her, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, why does it take that long for Smart to be recognized in Quebec? That's an interesting question.
That'll be a future episode.
Exactly. So without more digression, let's just segue to our actual interview with Madalena. Didn't mention her name before. And well, that's about what I had to say. Anything else to add before we jump into
Well, I will just add that like she had a big impact on both of us, and if you're still watching this podcast at this moment, continue to watch because she has a lot to say.
I couldn't have said it better. So let's go.
For the second episode, we do have a guest. Very privileged to have Madalena with us. Madalena, tell us about your COVID.
Like you said, my name is Madalena. I've worked in addiction for a number of years. I started the Smart Recovery Quebec in 2011. I started the first and only meeting in the province of Quebec. In 2011, started in Montreal West at the Anglican Church. And how I came to starting to do SMART was a number of factors. Before doing the meetings, I've noticed there were not many alternatives. Usually 12 steps were the go-to. And when I work in an inpatient facility, I've noticed a lot of the clients, we call them clients, not patients, were complaining that 12 steps didn't work for them. And, they've been to many meetings, the program wasn't for them. And, I wasn't against it because I was not fully aware of what it was. I remember attending meetings on my own to see what they were like. And I would never call it treatment. It's not something I would advocate in a program, like let's say an inpatient program. It's something that I would recommend when people finish an inpatient program to continue with meetings, because meetings are essential. Meetings is what keeps people focused in their recovery, especially in early recovery. I've met people over the years who stopped on their own, without meetings, without treatment, without therapy. Some people call them lucky bastards. I've seen people come to my meeting, my Smart Recovery meeting, without going into inpatient and stopping on their own with the help of the meetings. So what got me into SMART was a number of factors. I researched online about other programs like support groups, and I came across SMART, and I was like, wow, why didn't I know about this sooner? I've worked in the field for so many years at the time, and I was kind of shocked that there was alternatives, outside of 12 steps and outside of an outpatient program. Because when I'm talking about meetings, there are many meetings out there that are not 12 steps, that are not Smart Recovery. We have outpatient programs here in Montreal that offer meetings to their clients, and they're CBT based. Or they could be community-based, like Portage. But I found SMART and I said, oh, this is another alternative. This is an alternative that's kind of similar to 12 steps, where it's just you come into the room and it's a support group. The only difference that I found, which I thought was a bit more beneficial, was that there's more crosstalk in SMART Recovery that you don't have in other programs like 12 steps. And I think there's a reason for that. I think one of which is people who do SMART Recovery are trained. The facilitators are all trained. Whereas I don't think 12 step, there is a training to be somebody to run a meeting. I think they just read, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they just read from a manual what to do in the meeting. And
Switch out, it could be anybody. So some different had everything on this.
You become a sponsor when you raise your hand.
yeah,
That's about it.
Yeah.
The school process is you want to do it.
reasons why I like SMART is we don't have sponsors. SMART stands for self-management and recovery training. And if you cannot manage yourself, nobody else can. And there's nothing wrong of people who do both, of people who do 12 steps and they do SMART. Some people like sponsors and other people don't care much about them. But for me, I think of the sponsor on a safety issue. As a woman myself, I've been very fortunate that nothing's ever happened to me, but I've talked to many women in treatment who felt uncomfortable because there were a lot of 13 steppers.
Uh-huh.
And 13 steppers are people who prey on people of the opposite sex. Like an older man with a young lady. I'm sure they're older women with young men. It happens the other way too. I'm not so fucking. Oh, sorry. But, we don't have that, at least at my meeting, I know we don't have that.
So you'd say the community is better safeguarded due to
The sponsorship. Because but what people do outside the meeting is on their own volition, right? Like if you're giving out numbers and meeting up with people that are still using, that's the responsibility of the individual. Look, if anybody can be a sponsor and we don't know their record, that's a problem, and for me, it's a stress issue.
and you see these patients, especially female patients, that are telling you about the situations in the work.
I've had some who shared that they've been sexually assaulted by a sponsor. And I was aware, and I've had some clients who were very 12 steppers. I respect them. And they were very honest and upfront. You're not supposed to sponsor someone of the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And one told me a sponsor is not a crisis worker. A sponsor's role is to teach you the steps. So if you have a good sponsor who respects their role and respects what their role is in terms of getting them through the steps, that's a wonderful sponsor, right? That's a very respectful, ethical, understands boundaries. But if you're like trying to be a crisis worker, controlling people, it almost feels cultish in a way. That's a problem. And when you don't have adequate training, there's one thing to be somebody in recovery who works in the field that has training.
Yeah.
But just because you're in recovery does not mean you're adequate enough to help someone in recovery. You have to have training. Training is essential because when you're taught in school, in your program, you're taught ethics, you're taught boundaries. It's inappropriate to bring someone to your house. It's inappropriate to, call someone at, 11 o'clock, 12 in the morning. A therapist wouldn't do that. So why would, a sponsor be allowed to do that? It's not the same thing. And then there's no clear defined boundaries and people get confused and they confuse people, get taken advantage of. I'm not saying sponsees get taken advantage of. I'm sure sponsors get taken advantage of by sponsees.
Yeah.
So because there's no clear defined boundary. And so that is what I didn't feel comfortable with,
So
yeah.
in short, no higher power will address those issues.
I mean, but there are a lot of people who don't have
The resources.
resources to go to treatment, so they will go to a meeting. And, Smart's a bit different because we use CBT, actually REBT. REBT came before CBT. REBT came in the 50s by Dr. Ellis.
Yeah.
He was a psychiatrist, and I think it was a psychoanalysis psychiatrist, just like Sigmund Freud was. And he believed that people could change. Before then, people didn't believe anyone could change. They just felt you were born this way. This is the way you are. This is the way you're going to be for the rest of your life. But with REBT, people can change, and also one of the thoughts and components of REBT, the way we think impacts the way we feel, and also impacts how we behave. So, at least with SMART, and let me tell you, I've had a lot of participants come to my meetings who don't have addictions. They have issues with mental health, like depression and anxiety. I had one gentleman who, lucky him, he didn't end up being, entrenched with drugs and alcohol, but he went through severe bullying in his school as a kid. He was a French kid in an English school. So he was bullied a lot, and that impacted him. So he came to the meeting as a way to deal with his depression and his anxiety, because the tools used in the program can help anyone. Anybody could get a SMART recovery handbook. You don't have to say I have an addiction to drugs and alcohol, gambling, or sex, but you can have problems with depressive thoughts, and that counts to depressive behaviors such as isolating and maybe agoraphobia, these types of things. So anybody can use. I mean, when children have a temper tantrum,
That's
because they don't know how to express themselves. So I think it's important to teach them how to express themselves without, harming themselves when they start. Like if I have somebody coming into treatment and they started at 12, unfortunately their emotional development is of a 12-year-old. I mean, I've had older addicts, and what I mean is they started using well into their adulthood.
Yeah.
I have a woman who started drinking at 38. She was emotionally mature. The problem was something happened at 38.
Mm-hmm.
Something traumatic to her. It was like a death of her husband of cancer. She watched him slowly die. She never drank. She was a Mormon. So she was like a religious Mormon who actually didn't drink coffee or alcohol or did drugs, that didn't start drinking until 38.
Mm-hmm.
So she was a mature adult. It just something traumatic happened to her, which she didn't cope with well. And that's when her drinking started. But very different starting at 38 versus 13.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of emotional development. Don't get me wrong, they're probably immature 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds. Generally speaking, the younger you start, the inability to express emotions or process them the same way. And that's what we need to learn. We need to process how to process our emotions without self-medicating to drugs and alcohol or suicidality.
So why do you think it is we don't introduce that into our schools?
It's because we live in a shitty school system.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. Also, it isn't just the school system. It also is where you grow up. You learn how to deal with emotions in the environment you're raised in. If you grew up in a household where you were taught to not cry, shut up, suck it up, buttercup, whatever these terms I hear in English. It's very different.
But it's cruel, like children that are too emotional, quote unquote, are perceived as they have an issue, or they should be medicated, just like ADHD kids.
Because the teachers have 50 kids in a class, and they can't deal with them all, which I don't agree with either. I mean, no offense. We have been cutting budgets on education. We've been I just found out they cut the budget at Portage, which I'm not a favor of the program. I've never worked there. But let me tell you, we have overdose rate crisis in Quebec and addiction rates. And why are we cutting services for them? Griffith Edwards had cuts. Portage has cuts. Foster's used to be 28 days. Now it's 16 days.
Wow. Yeah.
They're not investing in mental health. They're not investing in addiction resources.
But they're investing in commercials talking about mental health on the radios and the TV.
Is like we have these cuts. We have record rates of overdoses. I had one of my participants died of an overdose who was sober over a year. One of 7 who died in the same area of Montreal because of a bad batch. It's because we're not investing enough in mental health. And, we have a shortage of psychiatrists, pediatric psychiatrists, mental health nurses, there's just a shortage of them. They're burnt out, the ones that are working. So this also impacts our mental health.
Yeah.
You don't even have a system that can take care of its own people. And then we have a population of people who need more help and they have to wait months for treatment is not a good system either.
So the humane aspect of healthcare is kind of lost, right? It's mechanic, not statistic. I won't quote your numbers, but from your perspective, would you say that Smart Recovery, the program itself, yields some better results than other programs? And
what makes Smart Recovery very different is that I know with 12 steps, if you slip or relapse, that's considered a failure. And the reason why the rates of success for 12 steps are so low is because a relapse is considered a failure. Smart Recovery does not consider a slip or relapse a failure. It's considered a learning opportunity. So if somebody has a slip and or relapses and gets back on their feet, that's a success.
yeah,
And it's very hard to be in a program where it's very absolutistic. You have to be clean all the time and you have to be perfect, and that's a success, which is impossible, because to modify a behavior that's been ingrained in you for a number of years cannot be undone in 30 days, cannot even be undone for months or for a few years for certain people. Smart doesn't believe you start over when you slip or relapse. You just start off where you came from. And then you learn from it and you move on. It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's not like a failure. Like when somebody says, "Oh, I failed at recovery," I said, no, you failed at saying no. You failed at setting boundaries. You failed at maintaining a routine, or you failed at, attending meetings regularly. You failed at that one thing, but you didn't fail at being sober. You were sober for 2 years, or you were sober for 6 months. Something, even a month is something. But when you kind of say you got to start over from zero, it's not very encouraging. And it makes you feel like a failure all the time. And I'm like,
I think that would be how they would lose people. They just won't go back because they don't want to go back.
to admit, like other people come to my meeting, they openly share if they had a slip. They're not embarrassed. They're not ashamed. We don't chastise them. We just try to say what happened. What can we learn from it? How can we process this? How can we do this when it happens again or that situation arises again? We're not going to say that you're this failure because you screwed up. It's like you screwed up at that thing.
And it's part of the program, right? Before you leave the center, you should have a detailed plan.
Who slip and relapse after treatment tend to be those who don't follow their post-treatment.
Yes. Yeah.
It's being realistic with it.
Yeah.
For people in treatment is you have to be realistic. When you're in treatment, of course you're going to the gym every day. It's a 2-second walk from your room. Of course you're going to do yoga 3 times a week. We have yoga 3 times a week there. Your meals are cooked for you. When you go home, you have to be realistic. You're not going to be going to the gym every day if it's like an hour total to get there and back, and then working out for an hour or so, and attending a meeting and cooking. So maybe you can't go every day. Maybe you can go 3 days a week. Maybe you could take a yoga class a week. But not many people have that time away from their life to be attending I had clients going to the gym 3 times a day. I'm like, you're not Michael Phelps. That's actually, where you have to go to the gym 3 times a day. You're going because you're bored it's easier to go to the gym than actually do your work. I mean, how many people go to treatment and actually not do their homework
Yeah.
and not even be honest in therapy? So I understand you're not going to open up to the group and tell them about your past in a group. Maybe people don't feel comfortable with that. That's why there's individual therapy. What you share in group is not the same what you share in an individual. So people who only go to groups and have serious issues and aren't able to attend therapy, one, because they can't afford it, or two, they're waiting whoever to get on the list. It's very hard to work on a lot of ingrained issues or, childhood trauma or, that contribute to someone's addiction because they're not working on it. So
I guess
yeah,
most addict that I know, we have one thing in common, is that we are definitely unrealistic with time management
absolutely.
and self-expectations. Be a perfectionist and a fuck up at the same time.
Yeah.
It kind of predicts the results you're going to have post-treatment. This is why this exercise of working with your counselor, actually you need to cut somewhere, because there's not 28 hours in your day and not everybody. Because when we are in treatment, it's kind of a utopia of the best condition to be clean. Like everything is set there.
Your triggers and reminders are not there.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's scary because a lot of people, I'm not having any urges. I must be fine. So until you go home, it's paraphernalia you didn't clean up and get rid of, Yeah, so that's, I know of a lot of people who cleaned up their house before going home or cleaned up their house before entering treatment. I had one lady who got a new cell phone number before entering treatment.
Yeah.
And only gave it to her family. And that was it. And so nobody would be able to, contact her, like a dealer or whatever. She got rid of her old phone, got a new phone with her parents' or family's number, like those types of things. Like she did that before even entering treatment because she knew, she already was doing her post-treatment plan before entering treatment. But yeah, I think it's being realistic. Like people think I can hang out with the same friends. I like to tell people what to do. I'd rather have them learn from their mistakes. I would tell them what works and doesn't work. It's up to them to take the message or not. Because sometimes when you tell people what to do, it's like they don't want to hear it. And they do the opposite. It's like parents telling you don't do drugs and you're doing drugs, if you're receptive to it. Yeah. Some people aren't. They take it as, who's this person telling me, what to do and what I can't. Well, you know what? You'll learn when you leave. They tend to learn when they leave.
Yeah.
Make people have my voice in their head. Get up. Start your day. Take your meds on time.
Why do you have your phone in your room?
Why is your phone in your room? Whatever. Like,
How many computers do you have?
Yeah. People smoke more, and I tell them if you quit smoking at the same time as your addiction, there's a tabagisme study at the Université de Toulouse that says you have a higher rate of staying sober. Smoking associates a lot with usage.
I guess for people that have an addiction to something that is smoke.
That too, but also people who drink, they smoke, or smoke and drink. There's an afflation between some people.
See, I think with the laws in bars, I didn't have that correlation because you don't smoke in bars, right?
Yeah, but you smoke outside one.
Rehab facility, I didn't have a need to explore. But my understanding is that it's probably the most liberal place in land.
It is.
Exactly what you want. You can even order drugs if you want. Like there's almost no limitation to your liberties, but you are accountable. And if you don't work the program, nobody's going to knock at your door because you're late for group. And 1, 2, 3 times a week.
Maybe you're late for your first stores.
Yes. Feels that you are the person that is in control of your recovery. If you don't work for it, well, it's...
So the center where you guys went to is really for people that are functioning. If you're not functioning, the center isn't going to do anything for you. And you need something more disciplined. Like some people need a boot camp because people have had no structure in their life. It's like working with patients with severe depression, like you have to force them out of depression, force them to take a shower, force them to get dressed, force them to eat, so eventually they feel better. But
morbidities before you actually get the treatment.
it's just like, if people are like, kind of like, they need
Motivating.
or need that extra push. Like some people may need that extra push to go to a meeting. So that might mean their parent or loved one drives them to the meeting, gets them there, has them go to the meeting, goes home. Because if you tell them to go to a meeting, they may not be capable of doing it. So if you're very low functioning, it's very hard to do well in any program. But some programs, they do have like almost like a boot camp style. And it's not that they're bad. It's just that it gives them structure and routine because they've lacked that.
Yeah.
But where we have like some people that are functioning, they do have jobs. They do go to work. They're still, they have kids, they have responsibility. So they're better at getting up in the morning, going to group. And, I'm not talking about people who come in and they're detoxing and sick and vomiting and shitting at the same time. I'm not going to expect them to sit through a workshop in that state. But when you're, detoxed or you're high functioning, you do better at a program like Heritage, where some do need a stricter enforced program. Some do need it. And I've seen some people who may, go through the 30 days and I don't see them, they don't do well when they go home.
Because we're not all equal when it comes to the step that comes before you go into treatment. So free contemplation,
Yeah, just or preparation. Yeah,
something that Eric and I share and that we've discussed on the previous podcast is we made a conscious decision that we were never going to use again before going to treatment.
But that's the difference. Most people who enter treatment, most people who come to meetings, I don't know the actual stats, but I would say a good number of them is from outside pressure.
Yeah,
the partner, their job, the law. Okay, you got to go to meetings. How many people are mandated to meetings?
It may work for a while, but at some point, if you're not in it for yourself, it won't be sustainable.
I mean, I've had people get served divorce papers at the center. Some stayed, some didn't, because they were in treatment for the wrong reasons. They thought they were saving their marriage, and they realized the marriage was over. Well, why bother? Just go home and continue where I left off. Okay, I'm coming for my kids, and they want to be a better parent, and it might work at the beginning, but eventually they have to do it for themselves.
I originally before that phone call, trying to get that CBA cost benefit analysis, and I saw with my body when where I was going. Well, I knew it was a dream. So I mean, once I asked for help, and then acceptance was great for me. But going back to you talked about it being a limit. Like, is there anything you would ask or change at the Sunday weekend? Like, is this like it's should be something
do quite well because you get three individuals a week,
true,
which is more than any other center, by the way.
Yeah, it's been
an individual a week, and you do get 3 groups a day. I think the only thing I think would be nice, I know this people might not like to hear it, is some chores.
Yeah.
I think it's nice. I'm not saying, okay, scrubbing the toilets, picking up the garbage in the field and the cigarette butts or helping out, like cleaning the lounge. It's your space. It's where you live. I'm not saying like, you have to cook the meals and you have to scrub the toilets. Cases like that. Just something as like a community, it adds some little structure because at home you do have to clean when you go home and you do have to make your bed and you do have to,
and I guess that if we can maybe just parenthesis to 12-step, the concept of being of service also improve yourself.
Is more involved.
Yeah.
It's nice to have like maybe a weekend where the family comes and we do workshops for them and, and workshops together. If it's possible, that would be great. Just have, because I remember I watched this amazing documentary. It was in China. Of course, it was in subtitles. I don't understand Mandarin, but it was a treatment center in China. It was a bit of like a boot camp with CBT.
Mm.
And, and the parents were in treatment too.
The parents were.
Yeah, you had the kids on one floor,
Right.
like teenagers, and the parents on the other floor, because they felt that the parents played a responsibility to their child. In China, a lot of kids are raised by their grandparents because the parents move to the cities to work.
Right.
So what happens is these kids feel abandoned. They're living with grandparents who are a different generation, different mindset, and their parents are in the city working, trying to make money, raise their family, which is pretty normal. A couple of my friends had that growing up. They lived in like the rural village, go to school, and their parents worked. But they didn't have issues of abandonment or anything. But some kids will have an issue with abandonment. They feel like their parents, had them, didn't want them, and they're just in the city while their grandparents are raising them. So that's where it stems from, the addiction. Now, addiction in China is not like here. It's not alcohol and drugs. It's video games.
Okay.
Yeah, they're addicted to video games. Whereas here we see kids that age doing hard drugs and drinking.
Yeah.
So it's a very different kind of addiction. And I felt bad watching the documentary. There was this only girl, but it was long. Long story short, the parents were part of they had their therapy, they had the family therapy, they had to stay there, and they also had to help around the grounds, and you could see how it impacts the kids, because I remember watching a family session. The kid was so angry at his father, he refused to speak with him. He only passed notes to his father. So there's a lot of anger and resentment. So yeah, I'm just saying having families involved is a great thing, because they can understand a bit more their role in the addiction. And a lot of times people don't realize addiction flourishes in the environment that it's in. So if you're in a family that's enabling, they enable in a bad way. They don't know.
Right.
They're trying to. They don't know how to help.
Right.
And I know if I was in that situation, even though I work in the field, I would know what to do with someone that I'm close to and know.
Yeah.
If it was my husband or a child or a brother, it would be difficult.
As a society, we expect that post-treatment, you are cured, whatever medical condition you have.
Too, that's a bit different, but you would be surprised how many people go home and their families offering them alcohol. Around them, telling that people shouldn't drink around their loved one. However, you want to, have some modicum of respect or understanding, So, if I had somebody come over to my house and that just came out of rehab, I'm not going to be drinking wine with dinner. It's just, common sense, right?
Yeah.
But I know because I work in the field. But, to somebody else.
My Auntie Susan wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm. Auntie Susan wouldn't know, no. Or the families have addiction themselves and are not ready to face it.
Yes, there's that as well, that exists in many environments, right? Yeah.
So I recommend them to go to Family and Friends. It's a different program than, let's say, Al-Anon. There's a great book by Dr. Myers, How to Get Your Loved One Sober. There's also another one from, Understanding Addiction. I think that's Dr. Foote. These two were the men who helped build the Smart Recovery Family and Friends.
Okay.
It's not about begging and pleading and ultimatums. I've heard varying stories.
Those three words you just said are triggers. Even to this day, it is the case.
Being and blaming and ultimatums to have people stop. It doesn't work. And it's just kind of elongates the problem. I think you have to get to the point, and it's very hard because if the family members don't do some type of meeting or program, they're not going to understand what you're getting.
Dynamic with the person that was there 30 days before.
Yeah.
And the resentment still exists, and it's understandable. No, it's just logical. Even us, 30 days before we got out of rehab, we had no idea what that program was. Right? Nobody knows what to expect. So
No.
kind of is, I guess we are in a pain cloud era when we get out of treatment as well. Oh, everything's going to be very easy now. And we feel like nothing can stop us.
And it's riding 2 months, 17 days.
It takes a bit longer to retain the information, where you go for like 2.5 years from detox to residential to outpatient to sober kind of because they say it takes about 2 years to change.
Right.
It's not to say that everyone stays 2.5 years and successful. I mean, I'm sure people leave prematurely, but it's a long process. You work in the community, you live in the community, and it's just because it takes a while to get used to living sober. Time makes a difference.
How bad you want it.
How bad you want it, or how willing you're.
From a client perspective, mine is very different from a 12-step program, is that from the get-go, I felt empowered. By the first exercise we did, which was the hierarchy of value, the power of choice.
Yeah.
I am in control, and the program is named Self-Management for a reason, because power is in your hand. So instead of having to surrender to a higher power external to yourself, you have to find these forces within.
Yeah.
And the program is built so that you realize that actually it's always been in you. You just haven't learned to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, I don't have a practical experience for it, but even if you relapse pretty bad and so a couple of years, you still have learned something.
Success is defined differently. Like, I know 12 steps is total abstinence, right? Success to the individual. For example, I find harm reduction a success for certain individuals. I'd rather have somebody, doing Suboxone than IVing heroin or, that to me is a success. That's harm reduction. And a lot of people who are so against harm reduction, they don't understand that most people who start harm reduction end up abstaining. You may have a small percentage who don't, but everything you're going to have a small percentage of people who do or don't. But generally speaking, for example, success could be, getting a job. You may not be 100% sober, but you're finally finding work. That might be a success. Somebody who's been unemployable and not working, finally working is a success. Mm-hmm. Somebody being a contributing member of society is a success. Right. Just because you're still dabbing in drugs doesn't mean that you're hopeless. Right. Eventually, people may abstain, or they at least cut down. Cutting down is a success. I've had guys come to the meeting who are still using, they cut down exponentially. They used to drink every day to saying, I only drink 2-3 days a week. That to me is a success. Compared to someone drinking every single day to 3 days a week, to me that's success.
Well, that's the thing, right? Pardon the analogy, but it's like when a vegan will attack vegetarians because they're not
vegans. Surprisingly, I slipped a couple times, and it wasn't intentional. It was, and I learned from each slip. I basically said, "Oh, I better read the ingredients on the label. I better not take food from people, from people I don't know or trust." That was. I didn't go, fuck it, let me go have brunch the next day and I'm bacon, eggs, and sausage and give up. Sometimes if you abstain for a while and you use once, you go back to full usage. They call it the abstinence violation effect. But what I'm saying is, the slip for me is okay, I had some gentleman, he was from India, he made a chai latte, and I didn't realize it was dairy. I was that was a slip. So I told him I don't drink milk, I only drink, so he did the next day, made it with almond milk. But, another one gave me candy and I read it was gelatin and things like that. So you learn from it,
and you work exactly like the split program.
Yeah, it was a slip. I'm not going to go it's a learned opportunity. It's a learned opportunity to really read your ingredients, really be careful where you get your food from or who gives it to you. And it's stuff like that.
In places and things.
And so, and I didn't beat myself up. I felt a little remorse. Oh my God, but it wasn't like the end of the world. I'm okay, how do I not do this again? That's how I put it down. As students and people I don't think you need that much for a candy.
So you're going to the extreme that it becomes kind of their identity. And then still being like this would just be the end of them.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's a total life crisis.
Yeah.
When in reality, these
And it's not to stop. Being in recovery is a lifestyle, just as being in vegan is a lifestyle. Like being in recovery isn't just abstaining from your drug of choice, it's a lifestyle.
But that's knuckling, just abstaining.
Yeah. Absolutely. And vegan isn't just watching what I eat, it's watching what I buy, watching, it's an instant. And, what you eat, what you buy, and, how you get to A to B, it's a lifestyle.
it's very similar to sobriety. At
Yeah.
least my relationship to my sobriety is kind of, well, hierarchical values. Again, I guess sobriety is pretty high now.
Yeah.
That hierarchy, but every decision that I make kind of double check, is that good with that sobriety? It becomes a offensive.
And it changes as you progress. I've known a guy who stayed at the center for a while, and he did the hierarchy of values. He raised his hand. He said, they change. I said, of course they change.
Yes, often.
Because you're growing and you're learning more about yourself. The way you came in is very different than when you leave. And we do the tool here in the meeting. Whenever we have the meeting in person, we'll review some of these tools. And some of these people, we do the cost benefit analysis. We do the hierarchy of values. We repeat tools because there's so much to learn from them. And we grow as people, and we learn that, our values do change over time. Even our motivation, changes over time. Sure. Like the cost benefit analysis, the great thing about the in-person meetings is you've got people from varying levels of recovery. You've got people 19 years sober, some were 2 years, few months. And when you do the cost benefit analysis and you have somebody who's 19 years sober who learns more and says, I know one of the advantages I did with using, I didn't realize till years later, was this. Oh my God, I never thought of that. Because as you progress in your recovery, you start to learn yourself more as a person and about your history of addiction more as you're sober longer. So, people come up with stuff they didn't even realize, like they have in this epiphany. And it's amazing, like these tools are not something you use once. And that's the thing with the tools, like, any program, if you don't do the program, your chances of succeeding at it is hit or miss, Even with 12 steps, it's the same thing. The difference is we don't believe you're powerless. We believe that, you have the power of choice. Now, if you're in the throes of your addiction, you may feel powerless, but when you're in recovery, you are power. And when you're using, it's a choice.
Eric is so emotional about this.
Yeah.
It does when it feels like that.
Yeah.
That's not even now.
Yeah.
Really do any of these steps.
And that's another thing, with SMART is, and there's nothing against religion. I am religious. I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I practice. But I'm not going to talk about my religion at a SMART meeting. In Canada, this is a multi-faith culture. Christianity, you go to church and you talk to a religious scholar, not some Egypt who thinks he knows everything, right? It's not a place. If I want to talk about God, you go to the place to talk about God. The meeting is talking about your recovery and your recovery from addiction.
Yeah.
It's not a place if now you believe in God, great. You go to a place where you worship God or you talk to other people about your relationship. So my relationship with God is personal. It's no one's business anyway. So it's not a place to talk about that, and it's not a place to bash it either. People believe in, some people don't. Whippity-doo. I don't bash atheists, and not should they bash people who believe. But the point is, it's not a place for that. You go to the place to do that, Smart Recovery is a place to talk about your addiction and your recovery from addiction. And it isn't just solely addiction, because as you progress into recovery, you're talking about more like point 3, emotional upsets.
Yes, right.
living a balanced life. Like when you start the program, most people are like 0.1, 0.2. They're trying to build motivation to abstain. They're trying to cope with their urges. However, you can still use a lot of the tools with coping with urges for other things, like coping with anger or depression. Yeah, so you can interchange the tools for other things. That's what I like about it. And also the thing about SMART, I hope we're going to get a new handbook soon. We're still on handbook 3, which was published in 2013. So it's about 11 years old. Materials change. It's not the same thing. To medications used for recovery.
Yeah.
Like naltrexone, acompressate, Antabuse, Suboxone, methadone, to that. Other programs aren't. There's so much of the inclusion of anti-addiction medications in one's recovery. Like, I understand when someone's been using for 20, 30 years and they stop drinking, even if they stop drinking, they're still going to have urges and cravings. It's very hard to sit through a meeting, to sit through a program, to learn the tools, to use the tools if you're constantly thinking of urges and using. So some of these medications help with that. So I've had gentlemen in my meeting who used meds and they said, oh my God, I used them for a year or two. It helped me focus on the program. It helped me learn the tools. It helped me sit through a meeting. It helped me do work on myself in therapy. If I didn't have these meds, I'd be relapsing and slipping and I'd be on the revolving door of treatment.
She wanna know what's wrong with me. She said if you got a problem you can talk to me. A little conversation could be all I need. But right now, baby, honestly, I need you to just hold me tight through the night. No advice could suffice. Rolling dice with my life. Baby, don't cry. I need you to just hold me tight through the night. No advice could suffice. Rolling dice with my life. Baby, don't cry. I need you to just tell me that you love me when I'm going through some shit. Mixing liquor with the red wine till I'm puking it. Looking right inside my dead eyes, don't know who this is. Told me once, told me 10 times, please don't do this shit. Whoa, 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 whoa. Keep a fake smile, feelings that I don't show. Healing takes a while when you move in slow-mo. Before you grow cold, girl, I need you to just lie with me and hold me till there's no pain. Lie to me and tell me that it's okay. Lie with me until I go to sleep. I promise you it's not that deep. She wanna know what's wrong with me. She said if you got a problem you can talk to me. A little conversation could be all I need. But right now, baby, honestly, I need you to just hold me tight through the night. No advice could suffice. Rolling dice with my life. Baby, don't cry. I need you to just hold me tight through the night. No advice could suffice. Rolling dice with my life. Baby, don't cry. I need you to just
Yeah, so if you're still with us and you just were listening to Madalena speak, we had the interview a little short because where the interview was being conducted, we are not free with our time. There's a certain time they actually bolt the doors and we had to get out. Madalena was more than generous with her time with us, and we promised to have her in future episodes. And she's already tactically agreed. So we will delve more into the Smart Recovery Program with Madalena in future time. And yeah, stay tuned for that and we'll let you know when it is. What do you got to say, man?
You said it perfectly, but what I would like to add is that we are actively seeking for other guests on the podcast. We will have steppers soon.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's the concept, right?
Am I going to be there?
Yes, you will. We're going to challenge our actual positions and cultivate an open nest. That's the whole gist of this project.
I've been to meetings.
I know. But all that to say that if you are interested and you like the vibe of our podcast, please reach out, contact us, and if there's a fit, we'll fit you into the schedule.
We should say that we want to hear every type of recovery story, even someone that's gone and done it alone. That doesn't even really follow any set program that we're talking about, whether it's steppers or smart. We want to hear from everybody. We are very curious.
Yes, because there's statistics about the programs that are in place, but people that succeed on their own, why, and if it's Magic Crystal that saved you, like there's absolutely no story that I don't want to hear about. And
there's Magic Crystals.
There is.
Oh well, shit.
As long as you believe in them.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yes, all that to say that, I think you guys kind of feel that we are joking around, but it is true.
Whatever works.
Respectful. Yeah. That science-based smart program worked for us, but I can see how it wouldn't work for other people. Like, it's not a one size fit all, and I don't believe there's a program that's a one size fit all. Some people believe that their hammer is the solution to the nails and everything's a nail in life, but I don't have this vision. I can see that what works for me that doesn't necessarily work for the next person. And yes, I think that kind of conclude the topic for today. What I've liked about Madalena is that she is an experienced worker in the field. She contrarily to most of us, she doesn't have an history with addiction, and she is in the business of taking care of people like us, and she's passionate about what she does, but she's also very honest about her opinions, and that has been very, very refreshing. And
very honest, and I think that comes across even in this first interview with Madalena. Is she doesn't hold her tongue, and she's not worried about what she says. I mean, she firmly believes it.
She takes accountability. She's comfortable with everything she has to say. I asked her, "There's something you want me to cut out of the podcast?" And she says, "No, not a single word." All right. So
we like that, don't we?
We're not pro censorship, that's for sure.
That's right.
That might change in the future, but for now, we're pretty bold.
I'll try to behave.
And don't forget to follow our main page on Facebook, 12 Steps with an S Crashers.
Oh, don't forget, we have a fellowship page too. People want to check that out.
Yes, we have a non-religious fellowship that is meme-centric, where you can post anything you want. We probably won't moderate you. If you get moderated, it's because Facebook does not accept what you're doing. But we have no problem with your shit posting there, and please come feed us with your shit post.
We should probably mention, actually, now that we brought that up, there's a lot of ADHD and neurodivergent memes and stuff on that page, besides just recovery jokes. And now we were talking about recovery, but we were talking about getting guests, and we're not exclusive to just recovery. I think recoveries is shown in a lot of forms, and being neurodivergent and ADHD and dealing, these are still behaviors that the smart recovery kind of addresses. So if anybody, I guess, wants to talk about that, we're open to that too.
Learning at adult age that you are on the spectrum is
Yep.
in itself a journey to recovery and to understand yourself that is just as pertinent. And
It's been eye-opening.
yes, and it's sometimes, comorbidity with addiction is neurodivergent. So yes, if you're not necessarily coming from a place of addiction, but you have things to say, reach out.
Exactly.
All right, so it's getting late. Let's close that up.
You okay? How you want to do that?
Well, thank you for following the 12-Step Crashers. We do not have a sponsor, so if you're interested into sponsoring us, please reach out. But for now, we don't have any goals in that realm, to be real. But
I saw the shoes you want. I know who you want as a sponsor.
Ooh.
You, the shoes that you showed me. I know what you want as a sponsor. You can't afford those, man.
Yeah, definitely. Gucci shoes is not exactly affordable. That's true.
But we're hoping that Gucci has a sponsor.
Yes, Gucci. If you hear us, you're welcome. Please, we will promote and wear your shoes. Definitely.
You will.
Yeah. My friend will too, because sponsorship.
That's right. To every meeting.
All right. Bye, everyone. See you soon for the next episode.